recorded. So we're going to start the recording now. And again, my name is Benji Cohn. Welcome everybody to the, I believe this one's like the 82nd episode of the MOS program. So we have a great presenter, Logan Neu, with us today from the Wildlife Health Program. He's going to cover everything we need to know about CWD and the upcoming deer season. So it's been a problem in Minnesota for a little bit, and I think Minnesota's doing a very good job of keeping on top of it. And we're going to learn all those rules and regulations to make sure you're following along out there during this hunting season. So with that, Logan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Benji. I have my screen shared. All right. Yeah, so as Benji said, my name is Logan. I work with the Wildlife Health Program here with the Minnesota DNR. So we're just going to be talking about chronic wasting disease today, really what it looks like in Minnesota, where chronic wasting disease came from, and kind of what you need to know if you're going to be taking the field this fall. Second, there we go. Yep, so here's kind of the outline. So we're going to start with what is chronic wasting disease, otherwise known as CWD, and why should we care about that? So just kind of the general, I guess, morphology of chronic wasting disease. It's 100% fatal, and it's a disease that affects members of the deer family. So this includes white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, reindeer, caribou. It also has been shown in moose. This is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. So basically, it kind of happens slowly over time that we see the effects of it. And kind of some of the symptoms include emaciation. So that's getting really thin and they lose a lot of weight. Generally, you'll see their ribs and they just look really skinny because they're basically starving. They might be drooling, walking in circles, or otherwise unafraid of humans. And the picture on this slide is kind of showing what that looks like. And I'll go into the next slide. But it's a spongiform encephalopathy, which basically means that it creates little spongy holes in tissue, specifically in the brain and the nervous system. So we have seen other diseases like this in the past. Some of the more common ones that we've probably heard of would be scrapie in sheep, and also mad cow disease in cows during the 80s. And then humans also do have some prion disease, including Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. So this is a neurodegenerative disease in humans, can't be cured. You can mitigate the symptoms, but eventually it will lead to death. So the interesting thing about chronic wasting disease is not caused by a virus or a bacteria or things like that. It's caused by a thing called a prion. And a prion is it's a normal protein in every animal's body. But what happens in chronic wasting disease and scrapie and these other diseases of this type, basically the protein folds incorrectly. And what happens is it causes other proteins around it to do the same thing. So this diagram here really just shows, here's the normal protein. This would be for scrapie. This is the prion protein. And then this is what scrapie does to it. So basically, when they come in contact with another one that looks like this, it causes the ones they come into contact with to fold differently. So basically, it causes them to not function the way they're supposed to, and that's what causes kind of those big holes in the lymph tissue and brain and spinal column. So as I mentioned, there's kind of the definition. There's some of the symptoms. So in Minnesota, we're still on kind of the early stage of finding CWD in comparison to states who've had it for 50 or 60 years. But really, you only see these symptoms when a deer is in its final stages of life. So really, generally, when the deer starts showing these symptoms, they're going to probably only live maybe another week or two. And a lot of times during this time is when they get really susceptible to getting hit by cars because they don't have just the cognitive function to get out of the way. Most CWD in Minnesota is found in healthy-looking hunter-harvested deer. So that's where the vast majority of our CWD cases come from, are sampling from hunter-harvested deer. So just by looking at a deer and diagnosing it with CWD, unfortunately, is impossible. So all of the deer that look like they might have it, we do test for chronic wasting disease. Those have to get sent to a lab. So this is kind of a fun activity. It'll be a little bit harder with the WebEx platform. But basically, these are all Minnesota deer, and we'd ask generally, what deer do you think here has CWD? So you can still do this activity, I suppose, and just think and answer to yourself. But actually, all of these deer are Minnesota deer, and they all have chronic wasting disease. So the one in the middle is kind of the obvious one because it looks really skinny. It's kind of hunched, doesn't look healthy at all. And this was one that was actually reported sick. And we ended up dispatching that and took a sample, and it was positive for chronic wasting disease. And all these other ones were, again, hunter harvested deer, otherwise look very healthy. You can see a lot of them are bucks. So it can manifest itself differently, but in Minnesota, most of the deer look healthy. So a little bit more about it. How does it spread? So CWD spreads directly and indirectly. Directly would be between animals. So this could be through saliva or feces, urine, or blood. We know deer lick each other a lot. You know, they're very social animals, so they can spread directly via that way. And also there have been some studies showing that it can be picked up through the environment. So basically, if the deer, defecates, the feces is laying there on the landscape. Some studies have shown that prions, again, prion is what causes CWD, can get taken up into plants, and then deer can eat those. So there is some environmental contamination as well, and deer can get it that way. Prions remain infectious for multiple years. So even despite Minnesota's cold winters and our freeze-thaw cycles, it takes a long time to denature prions, and denaturing is just rendering them ineffective. And at this stage, we don't actually know how long they're viable in the environment. There are studies looking at that, but in Minnesota particularly, we don't have like an exact, 5 years is the golden ticket for that. So what makes it dangerous? As I mentioned, it's a progressive disease. So it takes a long time generally to show that it's even there. So a deer might get its first dose of prions, and it might get CWD a year or two before it even shows any symptoms. It takes a long time to incubate. Because it's a prion disease, there's no treatment, there's no vaccine available for that. Again, prion diseases are just kind of a challenging disease agent to deal with. And that I mentioned that freezing and cooking and stuff doesn't get rid of them. So the ways that are currently in practice that you get rid of CWD prions would be incineration, autoclaving, alkaline hydrolysis, or other extreme disinfectants. So all of the deer here in Minnesota that we can that have CWD go and get alkaline digested at the U of M diagnostic lab, so they're properly disposed of. Again, freezing or cooking the meat will not destroy prions. So you're probably asking, well, that's great, but why should I care about this? So really, the reason we should care is that it does have a negative impact on deer densities. As I mentioned, Minnesota is still kind of in the early stages of having CWD, but some states that have had it for 20 years and have high prevalence, like Wisconsin, Wyoming, Colorado, they are seeing a reduction in their deer densities, both in white-tailed deer and mule deer. Sometimes projected up to 20 or 30% of a loss annually due to chronic wasting disease. We should care because it's a non-zero risk to humans, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And we have seen other diseases like this, like mad cow disease has jumped from cows to humans through eating it. And really, it also threatens our hunting heritage in Minnesota and also the outdoor recreation industry. All this kind of drives a lot of conservation funding and other taxes through equipment sales and license sales and things like that. So this actually ends up impacting more than just deer. It impacts pheasants, it impacts like songbirds and things like that. So it is kind of widespread in what it actually affects, not just deer. So back to the question of, can humans get CWD? So to date, there have been no confirmed cases of CWD in humans. There is another disease, kind of like I mentioned before, that's very similar in humans. It's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. It does happen sporadically. As you can see here, it says 1 in a million people. The CDC and Minnesota DNR recommend not eating CWD positive deer meat. The reason for this is because there have been studies with monkeys and things like that that actually can get CWD from eating infected meat and other stuff, other tissues. And again, because of mad cow disease like we saw in the 80s, where infected cattle were fed to people, and people actually got BSE from that. So what we kind of recommend with this is that if you are hunting in a CWD area, you can still certainly hunt, and we encourage that. But we suggest just keeping your venison separate from other people maybe in your deer camp, just while you get your test, or while you're waiting for your test result to come back. So it kind of goes into the testing now. Well, how do we test for CWD? So live animal tests are available, but only on a small scale, and they include tonsil or rectal biopsies. So they're pretty expensive and hard to do, especially at a landscape scale. So because of this, we utilize hunter harvested deer to get samples from. And so the samples we're taking from hunter harvested deer or roadkills or things like that are lymph nodes, and we use the lymph nodes in the bottom jaw. Essentially, it's kind of, I guess, tucked more closer to the neck, but they're called the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. We end up sending all these lymph nodes to one of our diagnostic labs. We have one in Wisconsin and one in Colorado. They go through 2 different tests depending on what the result is. So the first one is called an ELISA test. That takes a few days to run and get results back. And then if that would come up as a suspect or positive, it gets a confirmation test. As I mentioned before, any CWD positive deer carcasses or meat, we do recover those when possible, and they're brought to the alkaline digester in St. Paul. So kind of moving away from what is CWD and why should we care about it, onto the history of CWD in Minnesota. So one of the questions we get a lot is, well, maybe we've had CWD. I guess our first detections in Minnesota really in 2016, and people started asking, well, what if we just started looking for it, and what if it's been here for many years? So we actually did do CWD surveillance across the entire state, starting in 2002. And this was because of CWD positive in Wisconsin, and this is kind of where Wisconsin was at, and they ended up finding a lot of CWD. Whereas Minnesota is fortunate we did not find that. But basically from 2002 to 2004, almost 30,000 samples across the state were taken from deer, and we didn't have any positives detected. And this was a statistically based design. So basically, if we got X number of samples from this area, we were reasonably, I shouldn't say reasonably, but there's a confidence interval. Without going into statistics, we can be this % confident that CWD is less than 0.5% here, kind of thing. So we did do surveillance then, did not find any in the wild population, surveyed the entire state. So then kind of transitioning out of that after we kind of got where we are, didn't find anything. Starting in 2005, we kind of changed our methods with that. And what the DNR does, or did do and still does, and this is in our management plan now, we collect samples from deer that are suspect, and so suspect here would be like neurologic. So basically, they're not afraid of people. They're acting pretty funny. They look really thin, or something else is obviously wrong with them. We do get CWD samples from those. So if you would see a deer like that, certainly call your area wildlife manager, and they will try and get samples from that deer. We do risk-based. So basically, if I guess the new infection found in adjacent states, we've done this a lot of times with Wisconsin. If they have a CWD positive deer close to our border, we'll set up surveillance to see if we have any CWD positive deer over here, because deer move around quite a bit. And then also just proximity to any captive cervid farms. So cervid, once again, here is just members of the deer family. Generally, these would be deer or elk. So if we have a positive farm, we do surveillance around that as well to make sure it hasn't jumped into the wild population. And to date in Minnesota, we've had 13 CWD positive cervid farms. So this is kind of just some of the information off of our CWD positives in the state, and you can see there's a map here, and it'll get bigger in one of the next coming slides if you want to see it more closely. But we've had 168 positive deer in Minnesota and in 9 different counties. And the biggest areas of the state that have CWD, or I guess I should say the areas that have the most, would be in southeast Minnesota. And this is mostly in Fillmore County and Winona County. which is the bulk of where these deer are coming from. And some of these are close in proximity to deer farms that did have CWD. As you can see, the map is unfortunately a little bit more widespread now, but I'll get closer to the map in the next couple slides. And then again here, just the information on positive cervid farms. We've had 13 to date. Most recently was in August, and that was in Winona County. And then here's just a little bit better view of the map. So basically those orange, yellow shaded areas, those are counties, and those are the counties that have had positive CWD positive cervid farms. And then the red dots are our positive wild deer. So this is just a slide showing our like apparent prevalence in Fillmore County. So again, that's one of the areas that has a lot of CWD in Minnesota. So when we first detected it in 2016, this is kind of the prevalence over 5 years of surveillance. This has not been updated since last year, so it doesn't have last year's data in it yet. But you can see our infection rate. You can see on the far left, it's around 0.5% to 1%, and that's low. That's good. That's what we're managing for. We're trying to keep it low. Studies have shown that once we get past like 5% or 10%, basically there's nothing you can do anymore. But because we're still at such an early stage, what we would consider an early stage of infection, there's still more of a chance of keeping it low and preventing a lot of long-term declines in the deer population. So now I'll be switching to what the DNR is doing and how do we manage for CWD. So our management plan was updated in 2019. It's currently slated to undergo a review very soon here. But so this is based on our management plan. This is available on our website if you're interested. It's like 16 pages, and there's also a short one. I think that's like just a few pages. But so the first step basically in our management plan is finding the disease where it exists and then finding it as early as possible. And this kind of plays into the idea that we have been doing surveillance for quite a while. So since 2002, we've actually sampled more than 105,000 deer across the state, and those are in all different areas, both in our CWD surveillance areas and also, like I mentioned, those otherwise sick-looking deer we do collect from around the state. Where we do find CWD, the next step is to limit the transmission and spread of the disease. So we do this in a few different ways, and we'll go into each one of these a little bit more in depth in a second. But the first one we try and do is reduce human facilitated deer contact. So basically what that means is that we try and prevent people from aggregating deer together on the landscape. So in areas with CWD, oftentimes there are feeding and attractant bans in place. So basically, when you feed deer, you might get the deer that are living close by your house, and you might get deer that come from 5, or depending on the weather and things like that, 10 miles away. So that kind of aggregates deer artificially on the landscape. And because CWD can be spread directly or through the environment, putting a lot more animals in close proximity increases their chances of directly touching each other and also potentially artificially, I guess getting CWD, transmitting CWD to each other. Attractants, kind of the same idea there, especially attractants. So like a doe in heat, you're putting that on the landscape or making a scrape or like a mock scrape. You see a lot of bucks come and visit that. And again, we're just trying to reduce artificial congregations. This is adaptive, so I mean we can do what science tells us with this in the future. So there probably will be an expansion near Itasca County and also Scott County because we found CWD positive deer there in recent years. The second part in our plan is basically preventing the movement of infected deer carcass parts. So that's kind of a mouthful, but basically what it means is we're trying to slow or just at least regulate movement between states and different parts of Minnesota. So one way to do that is through live cervids. So again, live deer or elk through the farming industry or also wildlife agencies. Minnesota hasn't translocated deer, so pick them up from somewhere and put them somewhere else in the state, but other state agencies have done that in the past. So that would be one way, is to reduce that or just not do that altogether. And then also preventing the movement of carcasses and their parts. So basically, if a deer has CWD, those prions, the things that cause the disease, are concentrated in the head and the spinal column. So we try and keep those parts as close to where the animal was harvested as possible. So in Minnesota, this was first implemented in 2016, but you cannot legally bring a whole carcass of a deer or elk or moose from anywhere in North America into Minnesota. Excuse me. So what can I bring? If I shoot my deer in Wisconsin, I can't just bring it over the border. So what you can bring is you can bring meat that's been boned out or cut. So if you shoot your deer, you can bring it to the processor near you, and they can process it for you, or at least get the quarters, and you can take that back across the border. You can bring hides and teeth. You can also bring antlers and clean skull caps with those attached. So basically, we just don't want any brain tissue on there because that's where prions are congregated. And you can also bring finished taxidermy mounts across. So non-residents who are transporting stuff through Minnesota are exempt from this, but there are restrictions pretty much in all the states around us as well. So if you shot your deer in South Dakota and you live in Wisconsin, you can travel through Minnesota, and you won't be under Minnesota's rule, but you still have to abide by Wisconsin and South Dakota's rules. And this is also just a map of where CWD is in the United States currently. This was updated actually just about a week ago. So all of those dots, the yellow and red ones, probably tough to see. Those are CWD positive captive facilities. That would be like deer farms and things. And then the dark gray areas are counties that are positive for deer in the wild. So we include this. This is some data from Wisconsin and also USGS. This is a project they work on together. We just really like this. It's a good way to illustrate why we have carcass movement restrictions in place. We're not trying to make it challenging for people, but this is a good way to help kind of illustrate what this means. So this study was from 4 counties in southwest Wisconsin, which is where they have the highest CWD prevalence in their state, over 2016 and 2017. So basically what they did is they looked at all the home zip codes of the people who were hunting in those 4 counties over 2 years. So each of these dots on the map is a zip code, an area where a hunter was from. And as you can see, it's basically across every state, almost in the entire United States, that somebody was hunting in those areas. And so the goal of this is to show that, if people took their whole deer carcass from Wisconsin and they got it tested, or maybe they didn't, if they brought it all the way back to Florida, whole, and then they threw, the head and the spinal column, just threw it in their back 40, they could easily be introducing CWD hundreds of miles away just because they brought that back with them. So in light of this, a few years ago, we actually contacted other states for addresses of Minnesota hunters who were hunting out of state, and sent them letters just saying like, hey, this is important. You can really help us and help everyone, help other hunters and people who just like to view wildlife by not doing this. And it is against the law now as well. So also we did make videos for hunters, so how you can cape your deer. So that would be if you are getting a trophy like shoulder mount, how to do that, and also how to quarter your deer so you can abide by those restrictions. And then this is kind of the slogan they developed: the risk is low when you quarter and go. So kind of back to Minnesota and what this means. We have carcass movement restrictions only in the management and control zones. And we have management and control zones in Minnesota where we found CWD positive deer in the wild. So as I mentioned before, a whole carcass can't leave. So the second bullet there, a whole intact carcass cannot leave the zone until a not detected test is reported. So test results generally take a week to 2 weeks, right around firearm opener, just because we're sending like 7,000 samples to our labs. It just takes a little while. But in the meantime, if you don't want to wait, or you don't have a place to hang a deer and you're hunting in one of those zones, you're more than welcome to quarter the deer out with the leg bone intact. You can put that in the freezer and things. And in our management zones, we actually do supply quartering stations and dumpsters to help hunters abide by these regulations. So if you are hunting by Rochester and you live in the cities, we do have a quartering station and dumpster there that you can dump the head and spinal column, and then you can just take your quarters and your back straps and trim and whatnot back with you to your house in the cities. So again, this is just an opportunity. We're not trying to burden hunters, but we're trying to do our best to manage CWD from artificially spreading across Minnesota, and other states around us. And we do have an up-to-date list of where these things are, where the quartering stations and dumpsters are on our website, which I'll get to in a little bit. And then kind of back to our overarching theme about what we do about CWD. We also remove CWD positive deer from the landscape. So this kind of manifests itself in a lot of ways, but generally we give hunters more opportunity to harvest deer. So we might allow them to harvest like 2 deer in a zone versus like what it was the year before as a 1 deer limit. Or a 5 deer limit versus a 3 deer limit, that kind of thing. We also have, in some areas of the state, we have a late CWD hunt. So that's another hunt after the regular firearm season that basically you can use leftover tags. So if you were, firearm hunting during your gun season and you didn't harvest a deer, that tag would be valid again during that late CWD hunt. So we give hunters opportunities for that. And then in some areas of the state, we use very localized culling. So that would be just around where we have a lot of CWD positives. We do cull some deer there. So again, this is kind of what I already talked about, but we increase the bag limit, expand opportunities, and then utilize culling in different areas of the state. And then kind of shifting now is like, what should we expect, or what should I expect as a hunter this fall? So the first step in this is really if you're hunting in a CWD area or not. And I'll walk you through how to find out if you're in one of these areas on the website. But here's a map basically showing where we have mandatory sampling in Minnesota over the firearms opening weekend. So just in general, this year, we're going to have CWD surveillance in 8 different areas of the state. Management and control zones, which would be kind of the orange and yellow. DPAs on here. Those have dumpsters and quartering stations available. They also have carcass movement restrictions. So again, we provide that to help hunters abide by those rules. Surveillance zones, which are the gray areas on this map, they have appointments available for hunters to get their deer tested outside of opening weekend. Management and control zones also have that. But all the zones on here, with the exception of just a couple, which would be up here and then down here, have mandatory sampling requirements over opening weekend. And new this year is we have a statewide sampling program. So even if you're not in a CWD management zone or surveillance area, you have the ability to get your deer tested for chronic wasting disease. So we have a couple different options. These also apply for anyone hunting in those zones. So any hunter in Minnesota can utilize these. We have the partner sampling program, which is a network of taxidermists across the state that are willing to take a sample for you. These don't have to be just adult bucks that are trophies. If you shoot just a doe or a smaller buck you don't want to get mounted, you're certainly welcome to go to them and they'll take samples for you and send them in to us to get tested. And we have a list of that again on our website. And then we also have this year a new program with mail-in kits. So basically you can go on our website or go to an area office and request one of these kits. And we have instructions and materials in there on how you can take lymph nodes out of the deer you harvested yourself. And then send those to us and we'll get them to the lab. So again, those are opportunities for anyone across the state to use. And then what's different, maybe changed from past years, we have mandatory sampling for deer harvested on November 5th and November 6th in all CWD zones in or on the orange map here. So basically on the left here, any DPA here that's in orange has mandatory sampling requirements over the opening weekend of firearms A season, which is November 5th and November 6th. New this year, we do have a couple different new management zones, I should say. So what was previously 179, so that's the area kind of around Grand Rapids, is now 679. So the 6s in deer permit areas designate that it's a CWD management zone. So that area, that DPA, will have very different regulations than last year, as well as this one over here, which was 261, is now 661. So these were two new areas of the state that unfortunately found CWD positives in within the last year. Let's see, again, voluntary sampling statewide. So self-service stations. This one changed a little bit from people who are used to hunting in a CWD area. They are available during opening weekend in surveillance areas, and then also during the remainder of the season in management and control zones. They're not out right now during archery season, and they won't be out during muzzleloader season. So this is changed this year from years past, but again, we have other options to get deer sampled. If you normally go to one of those stations and drop your head in the box, you can request a kit or go to a taxidermist or make an appointment at your area wildlife office. So a little bit on those self-service sampling stations, quite the mouthful there. How would you use it? Basically, we have a saw there and you cut your deer's head off. We don't return these heads, so if you have antlers on it, you're welcome to cut those off and keep those, but we won't give them back. These go to sanitary landfills. From there, you fill out the red tag, which is pictured on the right there. It just asks for some general information, like where you were hunting, when you harvested the deer, what is your DNR number, which is a number on top of your license. And we have maps and things there to help. You basically cut a hole in your deer's ear and you zip tie that tag in there. You take off the little stub and you keep that for your records. So if you would get stopped by a conservation officer, things, you can say, hey, I have this tag, I dropped off my deer's head to get sampled. And then also, if any problems should arise, you can call the DNR and give them that number, and we can help figure out what happened. And again, you just cut off your head, put the filled out tag in the ear, and you put it in a plastic bag, which is supplied, and just drop it in the barrel. And we have staff that monitor those and go and take samples from those. So if I'm hunting on the opening weekend, what do I do with my deer? So registering the deer is not the same as getting it sampled for CWD or vice versa. So if you come to see the DNR at a check station and they cut open your deer's neck to get a CWD sample, that is not the same as registering your deer. So you still do have to do that. You can register online via the phone, or there are still a lot of registration stations around. As for processing, we encourage you to process it how you normally would, but basically keep it separate from other deer that you would shoot. And then, yeah, because if you mix it all together right away with 5 other deer and one of them comes back positive, then you might have meat that is mixed in and it might be tainted with that. You can freeze the meat at this point. And I should say you are free to consume venison if you so choose. Again, the CDC and DNR recommends not eating venison from a CWD positive animal, but you're more than welcome to do that if you so choose. So again, kind of opening weekend, comply with CWD testing requirements. We do have some stations that are staffed, which is the majority, and then we have some that are just head boxes. So kind of like we talked about those self-service sampling stations with those barrels. If you're visiting an in-person check station, so that will have DNR staff and students from a bunch of different universities, we just ask that you keep your deer's head kind of oriented towards the back, so towards your tailgate or towards your trunk, just so it's easier for us to get the samples out, because we will be cutting the neck. Also have your hunting license available, because we'll just get a bunch of information from there to help your process go faster. And then also relatively where you harvested your deer. We have maps and we have tablets that we enter data online to help make that a little bit easier. How do you check your test results if you get it sampled? So results take 7 to 14 days. Again, around the firearms openers when we ship the majority of our samples, so it can take a little bit longer. So that's why kind of the 14 days. Use your Minnesota DNR number. So that's actually on your hunting license. That's unique to you. It's the same across all of your licenses. So if you have an early antlerless tag and you have your your archery tag, and your fishing license. They're actually all the same number. So you can use that on our website to check your results. And the DNR only calls you if your deer would come back positive. So if you don't hear anything from us, after a couple weeks, then that's generally good news. No news is good news in that regard. So this kind of begs the question, well, if you're going to cut open the deer's neck, what if I have a trophy deer that I don't want you to do that to? We totally understand. A lot of people within our agency are hunters and stuff as well, and we want to make it as possible and as easy as possible and help you keep that memory alive and maintain your trophy. So if you're doing a European mount, which is just the skull and antlers, getting a CWD sample taken won't affect anything. It doesn't cut any of the bones or anything like that, so it won't wreck any of that. But if you want to do a shoulder mount, our normal sampling where we cut open the neck will ruin that. So we do, like I mentioned, we partner with taxidermists, and we have lists available if you come and visit us. We'll give you a list of all the people in your area that are certified to take these samples and won't ruin your cape or anything like that. Otherwise, we do have forms that we fill out, and we track where you're going to get your taxidermist, and we talk to you about getting the samples back to us. Again, our taxidermist list, if you come to a check station, we have those available, and also they're on the website. And again, this is also important following carcass movement restrictions to choose a taxidermist that's in your area if you're in a management or control zone. So at this point, if you've tuned off or I guess zoned out, I'd ask you to come back now because we'll go through kind of the website tutorial. So basically all the stuff I said here is found and available on our website. So this is probably going to be one of the most valuable things for you to remember from today. So I will click on this and we'll kind of do just a little walkthrough where you can find all this information if you didn't have a chance to write it down or want to reference it later. And this will also get put in the chat or Q&A. All right, so this is the main landing page for chronic wasting disease, everything in Minnesota. You can find this just by Googling MN CWD or MN DNR CWD, that kind of thing. So it's really easy to find, just a couple things you have to Google and it'll bring you right here. And this is the main page for everything you need to know. So this just gives information that we've already kind of run through. Here's the map of where it is in the state. And really, kind of like I said before, we should figure out what DPA you're hunting in. So there's this button right here that we'll click on to find the requirements. So if you know the number already, you can do that or search here. Otherwise, if you really don't know, maybe you're trying a different area of the state or you're new to hunting, we have an interactive map. So this basically just lets you zoom in and move anywhere in the state to see where you might be hunting. So
See, Logan, we're still
Yep.
seeing the website tutorial video and not the live
Okay.
website version. So
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it, Benji. Give me 1 sec to figure this out. We had it working beforehand, so.
yeah, it worked out really slick beforehand. So, and one of the questions we got from Jake's was, should we be concerned about consuming deer if our area is adjacent or near by an area where infected deer have been found? And I know you kind of covered that about, it's up. We're not going to tell you can't eat it, but it's up to you if you want to get that tested. If it's outside of a CWD zone, they can send those in to get tested on their own too. So,
Yep.
which
Yep. And in our CWD zones, the management zones, those are built large enough basically to encompass the area that we would potentially expect to see a CWD positive deer. So if you're hunting somewhere that's next to one of those management zones, again, you're more than welcome to get that tested if you want. But we don't feel that is a significant risk. So we feel like the biggest risk is where we're doing surveillance over the opening weekend of firearm season this year. So that's a really good question. And again, we do have those options available if you'd like to do that this year. And just to confirm, Benji, can you see the website landing page now?
yes, it looks
Okay,
great.
perfect. Thank you. All right, so again, we'll start kind of where I left off before. I didn't realize you guys couldn't see the screen, but we just need to figure out where we're hunting. So we'll click on that button, and then again, if we don't know, there's a link here, know your deer permit area, and there's a link. You can click on that, and that brings you to a map. So here, I don't know what any of these numbers are. You know, I didn't normally hunt close to home, but maybe I'm going to travel up to St. Cloud this year, and I'm going to hunt over there. So I know where St. Cloud is kind of on the map, so I'll zoom in there. And then I realize I'm going to hunt somewhere up here. So I can click on that, and it'll actually show me all the seasons. So your archery, your youth, and antlerless season, which we said is coming up here starting tomorrow. When the firearm season is, muzzleloader, all that kind of thing. It gives you the designation, so how many deer you can have in your bag limit from this zone. So this would be 3 deer, and then CWD testing options. So this DPA, or deer permit area, is 215. It's not actually in any of our CWD management, control, or surveillance areas. So if you can still go to this area and look and see what your options are. So again, this will give you options for kits or the partner sampling program. And I should say the kits, this is a new program this year, and we do have limited supplies. So there is a chance that we might not have kits available, you know, like a couple days before firearm season. They might already be all requested and sent off to hunters. So if that's something you'd be interested in, we recommend you do that earlier rather than later, just to make sure you have that ability. So anyway, that's if you're in a non-CWD area, and then we'll just do this one, 679 by Grand Rapids, to see what's different. Again, it has all of your stuff about season dates and things like that, but then it has this different pop-up here. We have mandatory CWD testing, and we also have carcass movement restrictions. So we'll click on the CWD testing one, and basically this just lands you on a page that gives you all the different requirements and things. It's a lot of information. That's why I wanted to show this all to you, so you can actually see what to do with that, and give you kind of the options about getting your deer tested elsewhere, or outside of opening weekend, I should say. And last thing to note on any of these pages, if you're in a management or a control zone, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the screen, it brings you to this, and this shows us where your stations are. So basically, you just scroll to the bottom and see I am near Brainerd. Oh, it's at the DNR Wildlife Office. Here's the address. And then this bar here, dumpster. This stands for dumpster and quartering station. So basically, it says it has a dumpster and a quartering station available. So that's to help you abide by those carcass movement restrictions. This also links to another map that has more information on specific stuff and where they're located and things. But yeah, so this is for management control zones. For surveillance area, so that would be a different set of DPAs. That will still come up to show you that you know, we have stations here available, and you can find their addresses and things there. Those are also in the hard copy regs book, which I actually have a copy of right here. So if you pick up one of these when you get your deer license, it's on there. The CWD stuff starts on, I think, page like 69 is where it starts. It has a big table of everywhere in the state that the DNR will be this fall. All right, so that's kind of it for my tutorial. So I'm going to switch back to my other screen here. See if it'll pick up where I left off.
You know, like you were saying, there's a ton of information on that website. So go out there and make a plan before you head out into the woods for what you want to do. I think that's the key point there, to know, have a plan in advance, so you're not
Yep.
stumbling around in the dark trying to figure out where to go and what you need to do. So
Right. Exactly, because like I said, it did kind of expand to a couple different areas this year as well. So we are kind of really suggesting that that's one of the really important things you can do this year is find the requirements for your DPA in particular. So, and then Benji, you can see the presentation again.
yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So kind of in summary, what does this mean? I'm hunting this year. What does it mean? As a recap, there have been no positive CWD cases in humans. But again, CDC and Minnesota DNR recommend not eating a positive animal. If you're hunting in a CWD area, keep hunting. Like I said, CWD in Minnesota is still relatively rare, thankfully. So keep hunting and enjoy your hunt. We want to preserve the tradition that we have. You can get your deer tested if you're in one of those areas, or like I said, new statewide options. So that's good. Gives you a peace of mind and also helps us do better surveillance on the disease. Not to mention it's mandatory for some dates and areas. Again, best management would be not to mix your deer together with other people's or other deer you shot until you get results. Avoid eating tissues that have a lot of prions. So basically, like I said before, this would be like the spinal column and brain and also lymph nodes. Not things you traditionally eat anyway, but we would just recommend that you not eat those. And then also cleaning equipment. So knives that you use to take your CWD sample or even just to gut your deer, things like that can be sterilized basically with 40% bleach water solution to help denature prions. So just some more resources. This is the main CWD landing page, but everything that you can find on our website, we have videos on how to cape and quarter and gut your deer, how to use a sampling station, where to find taxidermists or dumpsters, and where your CWD stations are. So there's a lot of information on there, and like I said, that would be the best place to look is to start with your DPA and make that plan ahead of time. And then this is an example of what our map looks like. We do have a map and we show where all of the positives in Minnesota have been detected. It's pretty cool. You can zoom in and see information on each of those deer. And this is a snapshot from last year of just our results page. We have summaries by each DPA, how many samples we had, how many had not detected results, suspect, or positive, things like that. So we have that again this year. So kind of one final summary slide. CWD is relatively rare in Minnesota, and we're trying to keep it that way. So Minnesota is taking a pretty aggressive management approach to protect our deer population for one, and also our hunting heritage. And the key here is, we can adapt as we learn things are effective or not as effective. These management practices aren't probably going to stay the same forever. We're trying to adapt and make things better all the time. So we do have that ability and are looking, we do evaluate what success is and what's working and what's not, and can change that. But basically, we can't do this without your guys' help. So if you're hunting in the field this year, definitely make a plan and submit a CWD sample. And if you don't hunt, it's still important, and you can let friends or family know. Just even about CWD, it's a pretty interesting disease, regardless if you hunt or not. So with that, I will wrap up, and I can start taking some questions and things like that.
Great. You had a lot of great information there. So thank you everybody for sticking around. We got some great questions coming in too. So one of our favorite guest attendees here, Jeff, is asking, is there any evidence of attractants produced or harvested commercially, like something like doe urine, containing CWD prions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we really don't have a good test for things like that. So, I mean, our ban in place for that is really more focused on the artificial congregations. We do know some of these attractants come from, places that do have deer in facilities and could potentially have positive animals. But currently, there's no framework at the state or federal level, as far as I know, that's set up to handle that. So again, kind of the reason we have that in place is to prevent artificial deer congregations, not necessarily the risk of a CWD prion from a doe in heat scent drip on a branch kind of thing. It's a good question.
Michael is wondering if there's any progress being made on the development of a rapid field test for CWD.
Yeah, good question, Michael. So there is a group at the U of M, and also there are quite a few groups around the country working on a couple different testing methods. That's a rapid test and also can be tested on live deer, so not just lymph tissue. So it could be blood or something like that instead. It's called RT Quick, and the group in Minnesota is called MinPro. We do collaborate with them, and we give them pretty much all of our samples to help validate their techniques and things. So they are making headway on that, and as are groups across the country. And really, it's still in kind of the trial phases, and they're showing promising results, but it still has to be validated by USDA, because the tests we use currently are validated by USDA as being such and such effective and accurate. So they're working on validating that test currently. And that might take still quite a few years, but there is progress being made, and we do help collaborate when we can on things like that.
That'd be great. That'd be a good thing to have. So,
Absolutely.
Michael also asked, where are samples being sent this year, out of state or in Minnesota? In 2021, it took 19 days for me to get results of my opening day deer when an out of state lab processed it. A long time, a long wait time makes it easier for potential contamination at meat processors. So we talked about that a little bit in there, and it kind of depends on how many deer samples they're getting, I'm guessing. But
Yep. And it's going to, depending on the area of the state you're in, it'll go to Wisconsin Diagnostic Lab or Colorado. We would do Minnesota, but there's not like an actual accredited lab here that can handle the volume that we need. So we can ship samples directly to the U of M VDL, but they actually end up shipping those samples to Colorado anyway, just because they have a larger facility to do that. So yeah, again, opening weekend samples unfortunately can take a little bit longer than maybe an archery sample would, because we're sending 7,000 samples, as are other states sending to these labs. So we'd love to keep them closer, but unfortunately we just don't have the ability to do that right now.
great. Jeff again was wondering about, for surveillance or management zones where you are not near a carcass collection dumpster or anywhere in Minnesota, what is the recommended disposal for a carcass? Will all garbage haulers across Minnesota accept deer carcasses in regular garbage?
That's a good question. So management zones, we have dumpsters available in all of those now, and I think generally they're about 15 miles apart if you're in one of those zones. So we try and make it convenient. If you're hunting anywhere in between, hopefully you only have to drive, like at the maximum of 10 miles to hopefully get to a dumpster to drop that stuff off. If you are hunting outside of those zones, so surveillance zones, we don't have carcass movement restrictions or dumpsters. So those are just higher risk areas where monitoring for CWD hasn't been found in the wild yet. So the best management practice, you can leave it where it is. Again, we don't want you moving that deer across the state. I mean, you can. That's not against the law. But the best management practice would be keeping it close to home. As for your question about if all garbage haulers will take carcass parts, that's up to the carcass hauler. So with your household waste, obviously a landfill is a good way to get rid of it. That's where all of our dumpsters go, or into line landfill. And basically that's just to get those carcasses off the landscape, where deer can't keep interacting with it. So if you want to do that, you'd have to check your local stuff, if you could bring them to a local landfill instead.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and maybe local taxidermists would be able to help out with that too, if some
Yep.
of the partners that we work with of places where they can get rid of them. So,
Right, and meat processors as well. They can give you some tips and things, but ideally we want carcasses, overall to, be limited in contact. So you can still
yeah,
use stuff for trapping and things like that, but especially in areas of the state that is higher risk, we give those options to reduce risk.
great. Courtney was asking, how long will an area stay in a surveillance status?
Good question. So surveillance status, basically through our current management plan, is 3 years. So we have actually one surveillance zone kind of around Alexandria, that area of the state, and another one north of the Twin Cities on the border with Wisconsin. I believe those are both on year 3 of surveillance. So provided we hit our sampling goals for those areas, we would discontinue surveillance after that. So this will be the second year, I believe, of the area around Bemidji and surveillance up there. But in the management plan, it's a few years. And again, as the management plan gets rewritten here soon, that could be apt to change. But good question.
Great. So up to 3 years potentially, and then move forward from there. So
Yep. And the 3 years is because it can take 1 to 3 years for a deer to actually, show chronic wasting disease. So it's not just an arbitrary number. It's based on the progression of the disease and how we can detect it.
oh, interesting.
Yep.
James is wondering, this is an interesting question on attractants too. Do I need to remove my backyard bird feeders if I live in an area identified in the CWD zone or county?
Yep. So you're still allowed to feed birds. I believe I don't have it on hand, the specific page in the regs book, but it would. I think the recommendation is that, or I guess not the recommendation, but if you want to feed birds, basically to have them like 6 feet off the ground, so just not accessible to deer. Which, I mean, a lot of people have them up higher anyway to prevent bears, I guess, in the northern part of the state and other things from getting them. But you're still welcome. You can feed birds and the squirrels and things like that. But basically trying to get that higher off the ground and out of the reach of deer.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's the reason is to keep deer from congregating, right? So if you have a bird feeder out there and there's 50 deer at it every night, probably take it down.
Yep.
So
Right. Yep.
or relocate it or raise it
Yep.
higher.
Exactly. And we
So
know birds spill seed and stuff like that. So stuff still might eat it, but basically we're trying to get it directly out of the reach of the deer, so they won't be eating quite so much.
great. Well, thank you everybody for attending. I think that's the last question I saw in there. Um, Amber, I don't know if you've seen the chats. I'll look through there real quick too, but it's a lot of information. Hopefully everybody has a great deer season this year, great hunting season out there. And visit the DNR website, make a plan for your hunt and where you can get tested, what you're going to need to do. If you're a person that wants to get a larger deer and potentially have that mounted, or a Europe mount or a full mount, check into those taxidermists in the area you're hunting and reserve a spot or a potential spot. And we wish everybody luck. And any last words? If you do have any questions, please reach out to myself or Logan, and we'll get answers to you when we can. So, any final words, Logan?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, and yeah, I hope you guys have a good deer season. And yeah, make a plan and check the website.
Sounds good. I think next week we are talking about preserving our harvest. No, tundra swans is next week. So an interesting bird that you can see in the fall migrating through Minnesota. So please join in next week for tundra swans. So I think with that, we can stop the recording, Amber, and we'll go to the back